thanks everybody for joining us for our second episode here. I have Basil Miracle here with me, the CTO, and we're going to get him on here in 1 second. There we go. So there he is. Hello, Basil. So today, we're going to be talking about Web3, blockchain, and all the associated fun with all that. So you want to kick us off, Basil?
Sure. So the trendy new topic of blockchain, Web3, and all the associated problems resulting from it. Everybody seems to be jumping on board. You know, crypto this, crypto that, Web3, and whatever else. And there are some glaring problems with said technologies that are really not being addressed very much. So just to dive into vulnerabilities, prior to Web3 and its implementation using blockchain, Web2 did not have blockchain. So it didn't have the attack surface area that hackers could exploit to do the things they want to do. But now we've added Web3 that adds a whole host of new vulnerabilities. And this problem with blockchain and Web3 is across the board. It's cumulative errors. Every bit of software, every program that you use has flaws in it because it's made by a flawed human being. And when you stack those things together, the errors become multiplicative. Over time, you get more and more errors rather than less and less. And the more complicated the design for implementing something, the more likely there is to be errors. Essentially, in code, they're moving parts, functions that can be exploited, any number of things. And so cryptocurrency sort of brings that flaw to the surface more glaringly, because as a distributed system, the mining software could be running on whatever operating systems it's supported by. It could be running on Windows, could be running on Linux, could be running on Mac, and all of those systems could be at various states of being patched. They may not be completely patched for a new vulnerability, but whoever's running it may keep it up to date, or they may not. Servers across the world are like that and have been like that for years. It's up to the individual admins of the servers to implement patches, bug fixes, and keep everything up to date on a regular basis. But we all know technology changes by the minute, and that creates multiplicative errors. So it just takes one person in a system to make the whole system vulnerable. It only takes one attack on your secretary's computer in your company to gain access to your entire company's network. Once they've gained that access, they can begin manipulating the whole system rather than just the one computer. So if you multiply thousands upon thousands of different, or millions of different computers, all running different levels of software at different levels of patching, they may be running the software on an old Windows XP machine. I mean, who would be running that? But you know, there are people that still use Windows 98, Windows 95. I've seen it in an industrial setting myself, so I know that still goes on. So what happens when you run mining software on the somebody exploits that, then they have access to your computer, but then they can do other things beyond that. So that's the elephant in the room that nobody is willing to talk about, is that multiplicative errors. And that when in a decentralized system, those errors become extreme, and they allow hackers to do things hackers could never have dreamed of doing in the past. Yeah, please excuse the noise. Somebody's working on something. So in the past, if you broke one computer network, it generally only affected that one computer network or one computer itself. But now, because of the multiplicative errors, you get millions of machines exposed simultaneously. You find one flaw in one stack that everybody's using, and then you can exploit millions of machines. Sometimes you can exploit them simultaneously. If it's a 0-day exploit, nobody knows about it, nobody's patched for it, and you find it in one of these API, jQuery or Google API or whatever, it doesn't matter. It could be any of these technologies. You just have to find the one. Once you find the one, you could exploit potentially millions of computers. And we found out that with the Snowden leaks in 2013 that the NSA stockpiles 0-day exploits that they don't ever tell anybody about. So what happens when other people or other companies, cyber gangs, whatever they are, decide to also do the same thing, hire hackers to find exploits and never tell anybody about them? That becomes way more than just a little bug. That becomes potentially millions of computers being exploited and nobody knows what's going on. SolarWinds, hey, you know. Would you like to speak to that, Rob?
Sure. Well, I was just thinking, about, all these different ways that, like Web3 is going to open the door for hackers to get in here, into different platforms, right? Everybody's all on this Web3 bandwagon, right? And it just seems to me that there's not going to be any way to secure against it in the Web3 environment, right? Because they're running off a blockchain, which you had mentioned some vulnerabilities. We were on the phone earlier today. So I don't know if you wanted to bring those up, the particular vulnerabilities of blockchain and all that. With that that 51%.
Oh yeah, the 51% attack. Yeah, you can if you can control more than 50% of the hashes or the mining of a particular Bitcoin or particular coin in their network, you can actually affect what blocks get made. You can affect effectively you can take over. You can't erase the historical information in the ledger, but you can then control what new hashes get made. Attackers can control and interrupt the recording of new blocks, prevent other miners from completing blocks. And on small coin networks, that's a glaring problem. But if you take it to the next step, what's to stop a corporation like Google, for instance, from simply just buying out enough equipment and having enough equipment to control more than half the network? If they did that, then there's no way that anybody else could compete. You can't an ASIC mining rig, application-specific integrated circuit that's specifically designed to mine can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. But Google can out-of-pocket that pretty easily. A regular person can't. So you're not democratizing currency. You're just handing it over to the people that can afford to control it, which has historically always been the wealthy. They always control the currency. So there's no security in that. Just because, it's infeasible to do it on Bitcoin or Ethereum because the networks are so large, it's only impractical until you have somebody with enough money and enough power to do so. But that's one thing. The 51% actually affects the whole coin network. But if you step back for a moment and look at what I was saying earlier with the fact you have multiplicative errors, that allows and has allowed, those multiplicative errors have allowed many of the massive losses, financial losses in cryptocurrency to occur, because you're running this software in a distributed way that nobody is able to actually control what it's running on or its behavior. So all it takes is one person or one server um, or whatever to become vulnerable, and a hacker to find that vulnerability and then get in. And once that is done, the damage is done. You lost hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever else, and it's impossible to secure that because you're talking about millions of devices in various different operating systems, in various levels of patch. That is, their kernel may be up to date, it may not be up to date, the drivers may be up to date, they may not be up to date. The whole operating system may even be like Windows 7, Windows 8 phased out. They're no longer supported, so they don't get patches. So even if you do have a good patched system, it's no longer being supported, so that it's not getting new patches, and eventually their vulnerabilities will become known and nobody's fixing them. And so if you're running on that software, or you're running on that operating system, that software is then vulnerable. If the software itself is not vulnerable, the operating system has all of those holes that can then be exploited. So a distributed system in which nobody is able to secure the whole system will eventually become plagued with these multiplicative errors. They will grow, and they will grow frightfully fast the more people integrate insufficient code, poorly developed code, code that was programmed by somebody who maybe didn't take into account that that pointer is now a null pointer or a dangling pointer, or it may lead to a buffer overflow, or even if they are a good skilled programmer, may just not be able to fathom all the possibilities that could lead to that being exploited. And you stack those things on top of each other. It's a Jenga tower. You're building it higher and higher and higher, and eventually it's going to collapse on itself. It's impossible to secure that. So the cure to that is not to have a completely decentralized system, because a completely decentralized system is untrustworthy just due to those compounding errors. So you need to have some sort of centralization. But centralization also has its flaws, in that once you compromise a central authority, then you can collapse the whole central system. So working a hybrid between both decentralized and centralized allows users to be able to be authenticated. It allows things like the hashes to be trustworthy. And also, I think an important point is that the hashes should not be generated by the users. That is one of the biggest gaping flaws in Bitcoin because of the compounding errors. If you allow everybody to mine coins and to mine this resource, then there's no way to stop the exploitation. There's no way to stop somebody from finding one of these errors and exploiting, and then even bringing the whole system down. And Bitcoin has mounted losses in the hundreds of millions that I know of. I've seen many, many thefts of whole Bitcoin financial websites going down and then losing hundreds of millions of dollars in coins. So centrally, the coins should be mined, or the hashes should be made in a different way to avoid everybody competing to mine it. By the way, you're mining useless numbers. You're literally using computers, sometimes 10 or 20 kilowatts worth of power to run massive GPUs, or if you've got the money, ASICs, which use less power, but they're also massively expensive, to mine this, an ever-increasing curve of difficulty. But at the end of the day, those numbers aren't significant in of themselves. But if you work as a mechanic, let's say, and you repair people's cars, you're getting an exchange of currency for the time and effort you put out to fix that car. Now, I can verify that from any number of sources that I fixed that car and I did that work, and that has real world meaning. However, Bitcoin doesn't. If you took away all the digital context in which it's used and everything else, Bitcoins are just long strings of hexadecimal numbers. That's it. That's all they are. And you're pushing these computers to their very limits to calculate numbers that essentially have no real world value to them. They're fictional value. And that fictional value is very clear to see if you look at a history of Bitcoin's value. A few years ago, it topped out at almost 70,000 a coin, and now I think it's less than 20,000 a coin. It's unstable because it's not based on any real world significance. Ancient currency was based on gold, silver, and copper, because those had to be mined out of the earth. They were rare, and in of themselves, gold, silver, and copper have properties that make them useful in other areas other than exchange. You can't say that about Bitcoin. I mean, they're tying blockchain to everything now for authentication and this and that, but in of itself, it's not like gold or silver. I can take a copper coin and I can hammer it out into a wire and I can use it in an electrical circuit. I don't have to go and have someone validate that it's legitimate or anything like that. It has a use in of itself. So I think that's one of the other solutions to Bitcoin's problems, or cryptocurrency's problems, is that they need to be central authority, one, and two, they shouldn't be mining against an infinite curve of difficulty. They should be doing real world actual work. So you have, you join UPass network and you have a spare computer with a hard drive in it, processing power, and you're not using it, right? And you plug it in and you allow us to use your bandwidth. You allow us to use that hard drive space. You allow us to do that. That's real world resources that we are using. We then give you coins in return, like I would give a mechanic money for fixing my car, or my a computer specialist for fixing my computer, because they put the time and effort into it. So the central authority mints the stuff and then only hands it out for real world results, bandwidth or CPU usage or memory or something like that. That would solve a lot of the problems, and it also would have solved the environmental problems with Bitcoin, because that's another one that's not talked about. I saw one Bitcoin mining rig that used 9.5 kilowatts of power. That is more than most people's whole households will even use in a day. 2 or 3 kilowatt hours is what most people will use for most things. Even your refrigerator running and all this. That power doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's not magic. It's made by burning coal, burning gas, burning diesel, sometimes wind, sometimes solar, but that cost is very real. And the harder the Bitcoin curve is, the worse the problem will become. Because if you can't afford ASICs, you're going to go out and buy the cheaper alternative of a whole farm of graphics cards. You got a whole farm of 3090s or a whole farm of the new 4090s, and you're running them at full tilt. You're running GPUs at full tilt that have a thermal design power of somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 watts. That's more than some old computers used altogether for their whole system. And that's one graphics card mining numbers that have no real world significance other than calculating against an ever increasing difficulty curve.
It's very unsustainable. Having worked in utilities, right, in control rooms, I mean, at nighttime, wind power generates more energy, but we have to turn off those wind turbines because it's too difficult to shut up, or basically to turn off a gas plant or to turn off a coal plant. There's a lot of things that have to go on, and then to get it back online by 6 in the morning, when load picks up again, it doesn't make sense. So that's why they go off, with the renewable stuff first. That's the first to get shut off because it's literally an on-off. That's all it is. And that's the advantage of electric motors, right? You can just instantly kill something. Yeah, and then as to the whole Google thing, you were talking about that. I already saw that Google's already dipped their toes into the whole blockchain stuff, and I can guarantee, like you said, they're not gonna go away slowly. You know what I mean? They're gonna fight until the very bitter end, and that's how it's gonna be with these big tech companies, right? They're going to linger on, and they're going to do whatever they can to maintain their power. It's just like Lord of the Rings almost, Don't get rid of that ring of power, not to be confused with the Amazon show. But the One Ring, I'll say. But yeah, it's so many problems, and it just seems to me that everybody wants to jump on these bandwagons like, oh, Web3, that's the next thing, or blockchain, that's the next thing, or whatever it is, but nobody's stopping and thinking like, hey, what are the ramifications of using said technology? Like, is this going to cause me a lot of problems in the future? I don't know. And they don't really think about it, Basil and I went to a pitch event, and I'm not going to name any names, but basically one individual was like, "Oh, security is not that important to me, regardless if I've been hacked or not." And that puts their customers at risk, right? So that kind of mentality, I think, isn't just in business owners or in founders. I think this whole, lack of security thing digitally seems to go across the board with a lot of people. So we're trying to raise some awareness as to why it's very important, right? And like losing your personally identifiable information, that's a big deal. Right? Somebody could take your whole identity because these systems aren't secure, and there you go. Right? Now you have these credit cards in your names, or there's been accounts where people have bought houses in somebody else's names. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff. So, we could, with our system, we can mitigate that completely. With all the novel technology that's been implemented into the system, with the 7-layer deep security suite, the ZAX, the zero access system, right? And it's the whole platform is so different from Web3, where we do have decentralization, right, with the nodes. And Basil can talk about that more. But it's also, centralized. So there's the Singularity OSN also has its own central authority, which works with these decentralized nodes. Because if you have a full decentralized anything, there's no way to regulate it. It's like the old Wild West where, oh, you want to be a sheriff or a deputy today? Okay, here you go. Here's your gun. Just do whatever you want to do. That sort of seems like what the Web3 community's been talking about. Like, well, we'll have some designated officials, look over everybody. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's really going to work. When they have all these different platforms and none of them really talk to each other in a unified manner, right? They're all sort of laid out differently. So trying to monitor that, it's going to be very difficult. I just sort of view it as a lot of problems coming up. But do you want to talk more about like the decentralized nodes and all that?
Sure. So our system, we've spent a lot of time rethinking all the way this stuff is done. The system is built using the basic layer of the internet that everybody is used to, TCP/IP, UDP. But the similarities stop basically there. My personal philosophy in computer programming is make it as simple as you possibly can. The simpler anything is, the easier it is to fix and the fewer problems there will be in it. And the simpler it is, the easier it will be for you to project forward what potential problems there will be in it if something happens. So we use the central authority, and even within our own UPass network, there's no single central authority. There's a distributed central authority that check each other. The idea is that you want to make it as hard for a hacker to compromise the system as possible. So you make it extremely difficult for anybody unfamiliar with the way the system works, and even if you are familiar with it, how it works, to have difficulty finding and breaking any specific one of the systems. And the system is divided up into logical virtual appliances that do specific tasks. They work on a need-to-know basis. They only get the information that is specific to them. And every user has their data divided up in a similar way. So there is no central login where you have a username and a hash in a big database of millions of other username hashes to be just simply exploited when somebody figures out, hey, SQL has a new bug, and I'm going to go drop TJ Maxx's database and get all their credit card numbers, all their user logins, and all that. You can't do that because we have the philosophy of make it hard for the hacker, make it hard for the thief that wants to come and steal your data. We want to actually put as many roadblocks in that path as we can possibly put. Now, for the virtual appliances, these are not roadblocks because the system is designed to operate in a known way. All behaviors that can be carried out are known. So if something happens that the server is not supposed to do, it immediately is flagged and we will see it. There won't be any chance for a hacker to get the kind of foothold they want, just simply because if they break something, the system will behave in a way it's not supposed to, and then it will immediately be detected at multiple levels, not just the virtual appliance, but the whole system is itself monitored for that sort of behavior. And by doing that, we have put, we've changed the entire way that you would normally work on something like Amazon Web Services. We don't just let you run these virtual appliances. We don't just let you do this or that. It's all seamless. You download a program on your desktop or your phone or whatever else, whatever device it will run it, and it connects to the server it connects to our network. And then from there, once you're authenticated and all that, you seamlessly use all of these different services. You get your data and all of that, and you don't really see the separation. You don't really see the encryption, and that's kind of the point. But somebody trying to breach that, they're going to only run into that. They're only going to, at every level, they're going to run into something that's going to put a kibosh on their attempt to get that information. This could be, let's say they forge one of our clients. Well, our clients are designed to be version limited. So if you got an older version of the client, automatically it's not going to connect. The system will not even allow it because it's an older version of the software, which means it could be vulnerable. By version limiting, you prevent a lot of attacks that hackers will get older versions of software and with known exploits, and then use that to do things that they shouldn't be able to do. But let's say you get past that point, you get into the actual virtual network. You have to know who it is you're looking for one, and this is not a name basis. These are complex identity hashes that are made for each user and each thing in the system. So you would need to know that first to find what even virtual appliance is running. But then say I want to steal your photos, Rob, of your family. Okay, well, it's only going to work if I know what your ID is, and then I have to compromise the system far enough that I know where your ID is. I know then where that container that contains that particular data is, but I also have to have said keys to unlock the container. So even if I get that far, I have to know what container it's in. I also have to have the keys to it. And if you're not actively connected to the system, everything is encrypted and nothing is open. So I would have to find a way to get those keys. And by the way we do our key system, it's going to be very difficult to do that. Keys don't last very long. They are ephemeral things. They come and they go. And private information, that is your photos, your family photos, are locked by keys that will be specific to your devices. You have to authenticate the device. You also have to authenticate everything on your account end, so that device can be issued keys, but that device's keys will be specific to that device, meaning you can't just exfiltrate the keys off of the device and then simply, steal the container and then unlock it. That wouldn't work. So that's the basic principle of how UPass works: is throw as many roadblocks as you can possibly at every level. The virtual appliances aren't just virtual machines, they're also sandboxed. And a lot of the system code runs in Rust, which is memory safe, with predefined behaviors that we know how everything should work. So even if you do find an exploit in something, that will immediately cause the system to behave in a way that it shouldn't. Files being accessed by a user that it's not allowed to, attempt to get out of the sandbox, all of which can immediately cause that virtual appliance to kill itself through apoptosis. It will kill itself to prevent the spread of an attack. Again, every roadblock that you can possibly imagine. And if you want to think about how to best do that, look at nature. That's why I named the apoptosis system apoptosis, because that's programmed cell death. If a virus infects a cell and the cell is protecting itself against viral infections, a lot of times the cell will simply kill itself and dissolve all of the components inside of it to prevent viral DNA or RNA from getting out. So a hacker is not much different than a virus. They want to get into a system undetected. They want to establish a foothold in that system where they can then further spread their influence, like a virus getting a foothold in a cell, replicating, and then spreading its viral load throughout the body or throughout whatever tissue it's in. So the attack is very similar. So the approach to defending against it is very similar. Don't allow that foothold at every step. Every point in the system is designed to do just that. And since we are the only ones that issue our I should call it a coin, but our hashes that we produce, since we're the only ones that produce them and we're the only ones that can validate them, if I do some work for Rob, and Rob, you pay me in UPass coin, let's say, then the central authority has that ledger as to who did what for what, tied to each individual user's account. There's no global ledger outside of the system ledger, and each account transaction where UPass gives you this coin for, let's say, setting up and running storage for us, right? So you, on your own private network, you're allowing us to use, say, a terabyte drive to store encrypted information or buffer network traffic or something, right? Then the coins go from being owned by UPass to being owned by you. And once that occurs, then your private ledger will record that and will have all of the information necessary to track those back to where they came from. So if somebody steals my wallet, good. They can't use it. The coins are tied to me. They're not tied to this decentralized ledger that can then be, once I get your wallet and I can get the hashes out of it and I could go spend it. But with our system, you couldn't, because again, roadblocks. We want to make it hard for hackers to do what they do. So we spend a lot of time here just thinking how to break things. How could this possibly go wrong? And then how could it possibly have been done better, designed better, more efficiently, or safer? And that's what we go with.
Yeah, and the other good thing about our system is, unlike blockchain, right, where everybody basically carries the exact same ledger all across the board, the good analogy would be this: It would be like if every customer in the world had every store's receipts and every store had all those same receipts. So all this nonsense redundancy, think about all the paper receipts you would have or emails you would have or whatever it would be. I mean, sometimes it reminds me of like people thinking that, they can just make these things out of thin air. Like it's just magic. We don't need, we don't even think about the hard drive ramifications of, the problems of storage, right? Because you got to store this blockchain somewhere or the ledger somewhere. And if everybody's copying the same ledgers and all this stuff, it's going to exacerbate the problem. You're just going to have more and more ledgers all over the place and more hard drives being used up. I mean, it's just not sustainable. The whole thing with Web3 and blockchain and current crypto, it's just a very unsustainable, anti-environmental thing. And I don't know if people even thought to think about that or if they're just like, oh, this is cool. I'm just going to do it. I don't know what their thought process was. I don't know, why people don't think about these ramifications. But Basil and I have always thought about long-term things, right? So we don't just try to set out and solve a problem that's affecting us right now. We think of the pain points that affect us now, but also the pain points that will affect us in the future. And if you don't think long term, then you're going to fail. That's sort of our viewpoint, I think, because if you don't plan for failure, then you will fail eventually. That's just sort of how it goes. People say, well, you only fail, like if you give up, or you're going to fail if, I can't remember everything that people have said over the years, but, it's just, they just don't think about some of these problems. And it just boggles my mind, I guess,
I think that's a greater problem in tech in general, is that it's driven by fads. I mean, bell bottoms. I can't stand them personally. I've never been a fan, but it doesn't make sense to me why you flare the legs out at the part that's the thinnest of your leg. That doesn't make sense to me. But it's bell bottoms are, like hula hoops and whatever. They're a fad. They come and they go. But you don't integrate bell bottoms into your car, your house door lock, your toaster, your smart fridge. Bell bottoms couldn't lock you out of those things, but these systems that we're adopting now can. If you have a smart lock, if you have a smart toaster, if you have a smart refrigerator, guess what happens when somebody breaks them? They can lock you out of all of it. Your credit cards and all that. The more you tie these systems together without any thought as to how they could be exploited, you're guaranteeing that's going to happen. No other fad in human history has had the potential to plunge us into a digital dark age like this stuff has. It's poorly thought out, and it was never, I don't think that it was ever thought of what would happen if you adopted the Bitcoin ledger for hundreds of millions or even billions of people. What is the consequence of that? The ledger is growing, like you said, Rob, it's growing exponentially. Eventually, that means if you try to download that ledger, you're using bandwidth, you're using processing power, you're using memory, and you're using disk storage, all for that ledger. You shouldn't be doing that. That's a waste of resources. It's a waste of memory, processing power, and bandwidth. You should only get what is important to you, and that's it. I shouldn't have access to things that aren't pertinent to me. That's security 101, right? Like you've got a company, you don't give your your new employee the keys to the CEO's office and a password to their computer. You just don't do that, because you isolate those parts of your business to keep not well-meaning potentially employees from doing harmful things, right?
Yep.
That's I mean that's the whole purpose of that.
Yeah, espionage is still a thing, corporate espionage.
Just ask Elon Musk.
Yeah. I mean, even, at the utility companies I worked at, I remember they even had whole courses, they'd be like, be wary of corporate espionage actors and all this stuff. And, always be aware that you're keeping your password secure and, all this kind of stuff. Right. And it's just interesting that people don't think about this stuff. It almost reminds me of like people like when they went to go build the car way back in the day, right? They had to think about all the things that car was going to have to experience, right? They had to think about, well, if I park my car on the street somewhere, I'm going to have a way to secure the car so somebody can't just mosey on over and start the car up and I get out of my theater or whatever I'm at, and where's the car, and that's sort of how these Web3 individuals and groups and all that seem to be. Like they're just like, oh yeah, blockchain will secure it all and you don't have to worry about a thing, and they don't think about all the potential problems. And we've already seen cryptocurrency and we've already seen blockchain basically get broken into over the last 2-3 months. We've seen some of this activity going on. So to say, oh, it's not hackable, it's going to give you security, that's just a outright falsehood, because they're not changing the way the blockchain changes or works. They're not changing or doing anything to secure it really. And I don't know if you technically could secure blockchain the way it's been built. I mean, I can't think of any good ways to do it because, like you said, or we both said, there's no central authority to it, so there's no way to regulate it. It would be like, it's like, that's why there's sort of like a federal government, right? Like the federal government was supposed to be a central unit to sort of oversee the states and the local governments and to give sort of a unifying structure to it. If you took away the federal government, what do you have? A bunch of different countries, basically, right? Everybody has their own laws and rules. Exactly. And so there would be no unified consistency to the whole thing. It would just be, well, Florida wants to do one thing and Michigan wants to do another thing and Ohio wants to do another thing and California wants to do something else. And while there are state laws that, are separate, there would be nothing that ties any of these states together. So they wouldn't even have to cooperate with each other, I don't know. It's just crazy to think about how these things get mass adoption when people aren't even thinking about potential problems. They're just like, how much money can I make today and then dump it, It's sort of like, it almost reminds me of the old pump and dump stocks, right? Like, do as much as you can with the thing, get as much money as you possibly can. Oh, it failed. Oh, well, at least I got my money, and then I dump it, and then the whole thing collapses. And, people are like, oh, that doesn't affect everybody. Well, if this becomes mainstream, if this blockchain becomes adopted by everybody, you think hacking problems today are bad? Heck, nobody's seen anything coming yet. I mean, it's going to be the Wild West times infinity, because it's just going to be like bank robbers coming in every single day. Oh, here's another bank robber, another bank robber. I have no way to secure my stuff. That's sort of how it's going to be, I guess. So,
well, not to interrupt you, but a good point. You're talking about bank robbers. In the past, the bank robbers couldn't actually carry off an entire nation's wealth. But as I said years ago, when they demonstrated the live hacking of I think it was a new Jeep Cherokee over the internet, they hacked the car, took control of all of its systems, and were able to, if they wanted to, pilot that car into a wall at 90 miles an hour. But now I've said the first carjacking, digital carjacking, is going to occur. It probably already has. I don't know. But theoretically, somebody could take your car over and then send you a text message and tell you to pay or they will kill you. What's to stop them? But compounding errors are a real pain in the ass, because with adoption of Bitcoin, and some nations are trying to adopt it entirely, trying to adopt cryptocurrency. What happens when the bank robber is able to rob an entire nation of its entire wealth? That will eventually happen. I've sat and watched things that are purely theoretical at the time that they're carried out, then become common. Like, for instance, stealing cars. I don't use a key fob. The reason I don't use a key fob is a key fob gives off a radio signal. It's in the hundreds of megahertz, depending on the car. If I have a radio antenna and I'm watching people get into their car, I can record the key fob signal. I can record it and I can reverse engineer it, and then I can get into your car. More than that, I could record the entire sequence in order to turn your car on, and then I could just drive off with your car. And hackers have done this. They use smartphones, they break into a car, and they take off with it. That's why I don't use a key fob and I don't use a smart car, because it's harder to break into. You physically have to actually mess with the one lock on the one door. You have to break that or break something else physical. Whereas with these modern cars, the vulnerabilities in the software allow somebody with a smartphone to come up and break into it and take off with it. They don't even need to hotwire the damn thing. They can just hold their phone next to it, and the phone does the hotwiring for them. Yeah. So what happens when you apply that same logic to an entire nation's infrastructure? I don't see that being a good outcome.
No, definitely not going to be a good outcome. And that reminds me, when we were younger, I want to say this was the early 2000s. And I remember in the news, like the news was talking about this. And the article was basically, locked out of your car? Well, don't worry about it. All you have to do is, if the other person has the key fob at home, they just have to hold it next to the car, or next to the phone, and then you hold your phone next to the car, and it'll unlock the car. Now, I never tried that, so I don't know if that's a thing, but, you know, the news organization on Channel 4, they were talking about this back in, 2004 or 5, somewhere in there. So that, you know, just like you said, with the key fob, and that's remotely, you know, if you record those frequencies, you know, and I'm sure there's a frequency database, you know, because these car manufacturers can recreate the thing in the event that you lose your key fob or whatnot. So once you have the frequency, that's all you need, you know, then you have keys to the kingdom, so to speak, and off you drive away. So
now the keys to the kingdom are literally to your entire life. The more entrenched you are in these systems, the harder it will be for you to escape from negative consequences of them.
Yeah.
And the scale of these things are not really commonly known to the average person. The scale of exploits or vulnerabilities or to how it's going to affect us in the long term are not fully thought about.
No.
And I think that's one of the impediments to actual security is people like the convenience of the technology and don't really understand how it works. And that always spells downfall to anybody. If only a certain cadre of people know how the technology works, and in some cases they don't even know how it works themselves. Google's neural network, by the way, was lying to them, and they didn't even know it was lying to them because they couldn't understand the neural network that their own software had created. Now think about that for a minute. Just let that sink into your brain, and then ask yourself, do I want that? Do I want this stuff that's not understood, even by its own designers, to run my life, to be integrated into every aspect of my daily existence, so that everything I do, from my job to my cup of coffee in the morning, becomes tied to this, so that some malicious prick on the internet who doesn't like me finds out my information and then decides to lock me out of my life. It's going to become so common that it'll be too late by that point to even think about the ramifications, because you've already been hit by that bus and run over by that bus and turned into a pulp by that bus. You're dead. someone yelling, "Hey, there's a bus," is redundant at that point. You're already dead. So what are you gonna do?
It's like the cybersecurity attacks of today. I keep every single day on LinkedIn, I'm seeing, oh, phishing attack, ransomware attack, this and that, right? Oh, cyber, the database was breached, and oh, we had a server misconfiguration. Microsoft just had that, and so all their data for all these different companies was just accessed and downloaded, and it's like, God, it's so frustrating. Like, I don't know. I wish that the people that had made ARPANET way back when they were trying to tell Tim Berners-Lee, hey, the platform is not ready for commercialization. It's not secure yet. Let's not, go ahead and ship it. And of course, everybody's like, oh, we have to ship it. We have to commercialize it. We have to make money. Money, 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 money. Well, now look at it. Now people are losing trillions of dollars a freaking year on cyber attacks. And they keep wondering, well, why can't I stop it? Well, the internet wasn't designed for security. Okay, well, I'll make blockchain. Blockchain will stop it. Well, no, that's decentralized, so you can't stop it that way either. It's like they think of the shortest amount of steps in solving the problem, like step 1, and they're not up to like step 1,000, right? They have to work through the problem and find out all the vulnerabilities of that system and make sure that nobody can get into it. And until those kind of actions are taken, these problems are going to keep happening. And so that's why we've been building this, alternative platform, the Singularity OSN, or operating system network, because it's designed to protect you from the get-go with all the thought put into it. A lot of people are like, well, you guys started this out in 2011. Why is this not launched yet? Well, because we actually took the time to think about all these problems and work through them logically, and to make sure that we won't be susceptible to any of the problems that affect everybody here today. So, but that's pretty much all the time we have right now. And we'll do much more, many more episodes. We might do another episode tonight. We'll see. If not tonight, we'll do it, this weekend or something. But yeah, I'm Rob Atkins.
I'm Basil Miracle.
And thank you so much for joining us on this little adventure into changing things for the better.